hard to think of Lincoln as relaxing on the beach, isn't it? There he is. Good evening. You can't see me, but you can see Patrick.
Hi, Link.
Hi, Doug.
I see you've got a beautiful Japanese print in the background there.
I thought that would be a nice change from those damn guitars.
Yeah.
Where's your drink, Lincoln?
I'm sorry?
He probably can't hear me.
She wants to know where your drink is. Your martini.
I'm afraid it's only a grapefruit sparkling water today.
Uh-huh.
Now, is that a Hiroshige print that you got in the background, or?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
It calms me when I'm trying to write chapters or after a long talk with Doug, you know.
After a long discussion.
Discussion, yes.
Like
That's a better way to put it.
So, Lincoln, can you hear me, or am I going to have to feel all this through Doug?
I can hear you. You're a little faint, but it's fine.
Well, if I'm any louder, I'll blast out the audience. So.
Oh, no. I can't see the audience, but thank you all for being here. And thank you, Doug, for being there, and Barbara for hosting this. And Doug, were you busy yesterday with your pen?
Yes, I was. I had my fingers are all crippled now. See? Can you see me, by the way? I think that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think he can see you.
Yes. Unfortunately, yes.
So
well, we can always fix that, you know.
We could, right? So just to make it clear, if you look at your book, Lincoln has already signed these at home in one color ink, and Doug signed them here yesterday. So these are both genuine signatures. However, for reasons we haven't determined, there's this weird kind of gluey look to the title page. I have no idea why, but it's a real deal. So there we are.
That's right.
Right.
Very good.
So we're here to talk about the fourth in the Nora Kelly, and I would like to add Corey Swanson, because I think even though it's Nora Kelly, Corey is increasingly playing a large role, don't you think? Oh, you haven't started yet? Oh, all right. We'll start over again.
Wait, does that mean that we aren't on Facebook now? Oh, okay. All right. You mean our imperishable conversations have gone off into the ether, and oh no.
Only you who came here live will remember these first few moments.
And tell their grandchildren about it.
Are we good? All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. Virtual audience, thank you very much for joining us. We are here to talk to Doug Preston and Lincoln Child, who is there in front of a beautiful Hiroshige print from Japan. But it's not the Great Wave. Which Hiroshige print is this?
It's one of the 48 stations of the Tokaido, and I'm sure I'm massacring that pronunciation. That Great Wave is so well known, you know, good luck getting an original print. They're super expensive.
They are, but it's quite a famous print. Anyway. Yeah, we have a one that my husband bought in Kyoto that is not obviously a Hiroshige, whatever, print, but a copy of it. And it's really, I have it right above my Clive Cussler Arctic Adventure, which is another sea print, so it's sort of nice on the wall. But you didn't know that. I'll have to show you next time.
No, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, it was right there. And Doug and I went home to play with the puppies before dinner after signing however many thousands of books you signed, but I forgot to show you. Anyway, we're here to talk about Dead Mountain, which is the fourth in the Nora Kelly. And as I said before we went live, I think that FBI agent Corey Swanson deserves almost equal billing in this book.
Well, you know, it's funny. She's kind of taking over the series. I mean, I'd say there's more Corey Swanson in this book than Nora Kelly. And as we go forward, Link, don't you think Corey's kind of taking over?
Yes, and it's probably because there are more criminal stories out there to tell than there are archaeological. And the archaeological ones eventually have to turn into criminal ones, and they won't be thrillers. You know, we mined that pretty thickly with Thunderhead. I don't know if we could do that again.
And we also, like Corey.
Corey's stories Corey's story is very interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
coming from a kid in Kansas, you know, who was rebelling against everything there was, to becoming a young FBI agent, and now we're sort of watching her as she grows into the job and makes mistakes. You know, makes great strides. You know, it's more exciting. And in fact, at some point, Doug, I think you should conduct a question for the audience and ask them if they like Skip or don't like Skip, because I've been hearing rumblings that he's just annoying.
All right,
You know,
well, let's do it right now. All right, who here does not like Skip?
Well, part of the problem is that the book only published today, so nobody's really had a
Well-
chance to read it.
He's been in previous book. Who here likes Skip? So 1, 2,
who
3,
knows
4.
who Skip is?
Who has no idea who Skip is? Yeah, that's Nora's kind of brother, who's a little bit, you know, he's and in this book he really messes up good, real good. Oh yeah. So yeah, he's very impulsive. He's a bit like I was when I was younger, doing stupid things, and then regretting it bitterly later. Link, were you like that? No.
No, but you still do stupid things, and now I regret them bitterly. Just kidding.
No,
They were too good to pass up.
there is some truth to that. When I picked a fight with Amazon, Link took me aside and said, "Doug, what the hell do you think you're doing? Picking a fight with a company that sells half our books? Are you crazy?" I guess I am a
Well,
little
thanks to
crazy.
Doug, I got my name in the New York Times. They interviewed me, and I was, you know, I kept it to like one syllable: yes, no, yes. I plead the fifth.
It was like you were doing a deposition. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think Lincoln is right that because there is more need for law enforcement and Nora has no powers of arrest or whatever, that Corey inevitably is playing a larger role.
Yeah, and you know, I really like Corey. I mean, I think she's had an incredible arc to her life, more than maybe any other character in our books. And I think that she's got a great future. You know, she really is a remarkable person.
So I have said, for those of you who get our publications, that to really enjoy this book, you should Google the Manzanos Mountains in New Mexico and look at the topography, because even I, who have spent a lot of time in New Mexico, were not that familiar with the Manzanos. Or did I know anything about Kirtland Air Force Base, which is at one end of the spine of the mountains.
Yeah, that's a very interesting place. That the history in this novel. How many people have read Dead Mountain yet? Nobody, right? Okay, so I'm not going to do any spoilers.
The three of us.
Okay, the three of I haven't read it actually. I just wrote it. I haven't read it yet. But
the Diatlov Pass, though, that's not a spoiler.
No, that. But you know, the thing is that the Kirtland Air Force Base participated in the Manhattan Project, and so and that's something that very few people know about, and that is a very important part of this novel. I can't say how or why or what happens, but that is the history of that. When you read this novel and you're reading about Kirtland Air Force Base or the nuclear weapons storage depot in the Manzano Mountains, all that's true. Everything is true. There's not the bunker, everything's true. So no more about that.
Well, it's also true that New Mexico was subject to what we call downwinders, the fallout from the nuclear testing. I mean, it was eastern Nevada was very heavy, but it also went across northern Arizona and into New Mexico. And I don't know if you noticed, but recently legislation was passed to give more people who are, quote, downwinders exposed to that radiation the same kind of benefits that people who were subject to Agent Orange have gotten. So, you know, nobody really knew when in the 40s and in the 50s, nobody really understood the dangers of radiation. I mean, if you read about Madame Curie, who eventually died of radiation poisoning, nobody knew when she was developing the X-ray, you know, just how risky it was, or that you needed to have that lead apron that they put on you at the dentist and, you know, all that.
Yeah, if you go
Yeah,
up to
but
the
Barbara, hasn't it been a long time since they've had any actual tests out there? I mean, it's been like 50 years,
They
hasn't it?
put them underground, Lincoln, once they figured out that the prevailing winds went east and it wasn't a really good idea. So they did a lot of underground testing and then they moved out into the Pacific. And I don't know if they actually do any at this point. I mean,
I
I
know at
haven't
one point it was almost a spectator sport to watch them in the distance, but that didn't
like a
last long.
giant 4th of July, whatever. But I don't know. And I mean, it's an interesting question, I think, about, all this fear of the Russians and their nuclear weapons. We don't know if they actually work. They're so old. It'd be really hard to, nobody wants to find out, obviously, but, it's not entirely clear that
yeah,
they
the,
don't
well,
have a
the
lot of duds.
yeah, the Russians, crashed their latest spacecraft on the moon. I'm not so sure about their nuclear weapons because a lot of the components in a nuclear weapon have to be regularly replaced. And so at Los Alamos, they have to machine these new pits for the weapons. The triggers are made with radioactivity that dies off very quickly, so they have to redo the triggers. They're in constant need of refreshment. And who knows what the Soviets or the Russians are doing? I mean, there might be a nuclear war and none of their bombs go off.
Well, one could hope that that would be true, or
Well,
ours.
yes.
But why don't you give us, there's a real historical background to this story that you have ended up adapting in this thriller to a nonfiction book that you were going to write. So what happened?
Well, that was interesting. I write occasional pieces for the New Yorker magazine, and how many of you read that piece on Diatlov Pass, the Russian mystery? Well, so I wrote this article about this old Soviet mystery that's so baffling. It's one of the greatest mysteries from the Soviet era. In 1959, 9 cross-country skiers did this long trip in the Ural Mountains, and they all died. And when rescuers found their tent and found their bodies, they found the most inexplicable a scene that just couldn't be explained. They'd all frozen to death. Some of them were horribly crushed, even though their skin wasn't broken. Some were missing eyes, missing a tongue, and they actually found that some of them were radioactive, and they had weird burns on their bodies, and it was just a huge mystery. So I wrote this article, and as soon as it was published in the New Yorker, my agent sold it to Hollywood, to a studio to make a movie out of. Really good movie deal. Wow. A lot of money and, great, a production team. And so the contracts came and I signed them, through DocuSign. They hadn't signed them. I signed first, right? And then I sent them off. And then the next day, Russia invaded Ukraine. And the studio said, forget it. We're not doing anything involving Russia. They pulled out, and rightly so, but that's when Link had an idea. I'm going to turn it over to Link to tell you how he turned the lemons into lemonade.
Well, I was awfully shocked, as everybody was, by what Russia did. And I was also pleased at how little progress they made, although I know that it was a great suffering to the Ukrainians that they made such little progress. But Doug and I were at the same time as this was happening, thinking of what to do for our next Nora Kelly / Corey Swanson book. The last one had taken place in near Santa Fe, on an army base, and we wanted to keep having Corey grow, but we also wanted to have archaeological mysteries involved. Like the very first one we did was the Donner Pass, right, Doug?
That's right.
Yeah, the Donner Party, which really involved both Nora and Corey equally. In fact, Corey came in kind of late for that one. And so Doug and I began to think about this story that had taken place back in Russia in the 50s. And these people, something had scared them so badly And these were experienced, very experienced winter hikers, young, strong, knew what they were doing, fully prepared. You know, they left their snowshoes outside the tent, cut their way out of the side of the tent instead of going out the front, and ran away. Some of them half dressed, some less than half dressed. And every single one of them died. But some weren't found for months and months. And as Doug said, when they were found, they were horribly mangled in some cases, and nobody can understand what would cause them to run like that. You know, when the front door of the tent was open, and of course there were lots of you can imagine some of the theories that came up, like a Yeti or Elvis or something. You know, but what I realized talking to Doug was that we could simply take this and transplant it someplace in the Rockies. And he immediately suggested the Manzano Mountains, which lend themselves, I think, really well to this kind of thing, because isn't it true, Doug, that in some ways at least, the climate there is fairly similar? Maybe not quite as harsh.
It is, yeah. The people don't realize, but New Mexico, like Arizona, but even more so, has some really big mountains, and the Manzanos go up to 12,000 feet. Now there's, even though they're right outside of Albuquerque, there are very few people who go up there. They're really remote. Nobody goes up there. They're very rugged, and of course, part of them, the Kirtland Air Force Base encompasses a whole section of these mountains, and then the Isleta Pueblo Indian Reservation owns some other areas. So all this comes into play in the novel, the setting, and of course, as I mentioned, there's some historical, interesting history there, dating back to the Manhattan Project.
So it's on the east side of Albuquerque. It's on the east side of the Rio Grande Valley. And as I urge you again to go look at them, because I was really surprised at how rugged they were, how high they were. But there also is a very clear spine across the top of the mountains, which isn't always true.
That's right. They're very much, north-south mountains with a very distinct spine, a very steep drop-off to the west, and then a more gradual drop-off to the east. It's kind of a geological uplift. But beautiful mountains.
It's really remarkable that we were able to transplant it so perfectly, not only from Russia to America, but also to New Mexico, which is really important, given that both the women heroes in our books work out of there, and we had to work pretty hard to get them in other parts of the country and other books in the series. And here it was in Doug's own backyard practically, and so he could do the research, which was another bonus for me at least.
There's some real Easter eggs if you know Santa Fe in the book, and it's really fun to read about the pink adobe and recognize that steak Dunnigan's coming back to the menu now. I was just there this summer, and it's recurring. But when you're writing about it, I guess it was the one you're writing about.
Yeah, that's right.
Your
Steak
version
Dunnigan.
of it.
Yeah, that if you go to Santa Fe, go to the Pink Adobe, order the steak Dunnigan. It's a strip steak with smothered in green chili, and it was
And
named
onions. That's the other key ingredient. Don't forget the onions.
That's right, onions. And it was named after this family, this ranching family, who owned the Valle Grande, which was a huge ranch outside of New Mexico. It was, outside of Santa Fe, 100,000 acres. That was bought by the federal government about 15 years, 20 years ago, and it was turned into like a national monument. But I think the government paid them $100 million for that ranch. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Wow. So Corey is being mentored by the head of the field office in Santa Fe. And Nora has a job now in who does she work for? Because she's acquired a position.
Yeah, she works for the Santa Fe Archaeological Institute, which doesn't exactly exist. There's a Santa Fe Institute, and there's a school for advanced research, which does archaeology. So it's kind of but it's a fictional organization that kind of combines those two. And
The funny thing is, at the end of the last book, Nora's changed from working for the Institute, basically to the Institute working for Nora. You'll have to read it to see why that happens. But she met somebody with a great deal of money, and we had a real decision to make whether to leave him in this story or not. And we decided to keep him busy elsewhere. Because, I don't know if we know how to juggle love interests for these two, because we're still fleshing them out. And that's going to be a problem, especially after what happens in the end of this book.
Yeah, we didn't need a billionaire in throwing his weight around in this novel. So
Billionaires used to be rare. And now there's so many of them. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, they're even appearing in books. It's very
I know.
obnoxious.
Well, you have him exiled in Europe or wherever he is. But anyway, Corey is the one who runs across stuff, and then she calls Nora, and Nora is reluctant to get involved because she knows it's going to lead to all kinds of work and trouble. But she can't resist, so the two of them end up. What is the instigating incident that causes Corey to bring Nora into whatever is going on?
Well, that's the opening scene in the book, and you have these two drunk frat kids, with their Jeep driving around in the Manzanos, as people will do, smoking weed and getting drunk. And they run their Jeep off the road, high up in the mountains, and then it starts to snow on them. So they have to go find shelter. So they stagger around and they finally find this cave, and they go in there and they're in the cave really, out of it. And then one of them starts screaming, "Oh my God, there's a skull here." And of course he's lying there, and there's an ancient Indian burial in the cave, and he's been lying on top of it. And so Corey is called in because she's FBI. This is on federal land, and they don't know if this is prehistoric or if it might be a murder victim. So she's called in. She calls in Nora, and then Nora is exploring the rest of the cave, and she does determine that this is a prehistoric Indian burial, probably related to Isleta Pueblo, and it all seems very, cut and dried. And then Nora's exploring the back of the cave, and she says, "There's another body here," and Corey says, "There's another body here." Nora says, "Don't touch it. That's, Native American." She says, "I don't think so because it's rocking a North Face hiking boot." And so then they find two bodies in the cave that are only 15 years old. And when they look at it, they realize that one of them has been stabbed to death by the other, who then commits suicide by plunging the knife into his chest. So it's like a murder-suicide. And how did this happen? So that becomes a big FBI case. And that's how it begins.
I would like
What's interesting is we had to think of a way to interest Nora, because it's becoming a cliche in our books that Corey calls her in. So in this case, of course, as soon as she heard that it was a prehistoric burial, she became interested. But then it turns out that there was a micaceous pottery found also, which is this ancient pottery of the Anasazi that has mica in it, which makes it glitter, almost like gold. Right, Doug?
That's right.
And this was at the center of the first book that starred Nora that we ever wrote, Thunderhead, micaceous pottery. And so we thought, wow, we could bring this back in and sort of make it a subtext to this whole story. But the Isleta Indian tribe wouldn't let us. They insisted that all this stuff there be dumped into the grave that they created for the ancient bodies. So that was one subplot that got pinched off prematurely. But it didn't get Nora. It had the benefit of getting Nora to the place in a big hurry, because she's fascinated by that kind of pottery.
And that's where Skip gets himself into trouble, because there's a sheriff who comes up there who's throwing his weight around, and Skip being kind of an idiot, gets into it with the sheriff. You don't get into it with the sheriff, not in New Mexico, and that leads to a disaster for Skip and a trial.
I would like to say that the people I thought deserved the trial were these kids, these two kids who were completely stoned and also drunk. And to amuse themselves, they picked up rocks and threw them against the petroglyphs in the cave and defaced them. And I was really ready for you guys to have the book thrown at them, but you were soft.
Well, it wasn't us. It was the, the FBI. Yeah, they throw rocks. They damage these petroglyphs. It's really terrible, horrible. And unfortunately, this really happens. I mean, you get these, there were petroglyphs at the Petroglyph National Monument outside of Albuquerque that were recently vandalized. They don't know who did it, but some kids probably throwing rocks or scratching their names. It's just awful. But anyway, yeah, the kids. Nothing really happens to them because they claim they were drunk. They didn't know. They didn't know they were old. I mean, and the FBI does not prosecute that kind of crime. And the sheriff, whose job it is to prosecute those crimes, doesn't give a damn. So he didn't prosecute them either. So these kids get off scot-free.
Which I object to. But there we go. So I have a
Barbara, if it's any satisfaction to you, that sheriff gets in trouble. So, indirectly, there's justice done.
Well, not for the kids, but there is for the sheriff, right? I have a funny petroglyph story to tell you. If any of you have gone up to Winslow to stay at La Posada, which you haven't done, I can't recommend highly enough. Just go for the food, but it's also great to spend the night. But not far from there is a ranch. And the rancher, although we did this, I'm trying to remember what, and he was fairly old then, so I don't even know if it's still there. But anyway, you can book a time with him, and you go to the ranch, and there's a ravine, or a coombe, as the British would call it, but any ravine. And if you're willing to climb down the rickety stairs and change your life and all, when you get to the bottom, there are all these great petroglyphs, and they wander up the canyon. Well, the canyon's quite deep by now. But a lot of the petroglyphs are up high. And I won't reveal which of our party asked, how it was that they climbed up on ladders to chisel these petroglyphs, whereupon we gently pointed out that erosion had deepened the canyon, and that when they were first put up there, the people were standing at ground level, but gradually, as erosion took over, they descended. But it's a fabulous collection of petroglyphs. Do you know anything about it?
No, I don't.
It's Bill somebody. You could Google it, but I really recommend it if you are interested in that at all. It's just to the south of Winslow, and then you take a road that goes east just a little way, and he runs these. Have you been there? Yeah, you get tickets and whatever. It's really fascinating to do. But I just love that idea that, petroglyphs are so old, and gradually, naturally, the terrain has changed, right?
That's interesting. That is fascinating.
There it is. They're
Yeah.
great petroglyphs too. Anyway,
Barbara, that petroglyph story is really interesting, especially since the person sitting next to you probably knows the location of more ruins than almost anybody else alive. In the trips he's made on horseback, following Coronado's route, and other trips, thousands of miles, he's been to places so remote and found things that boggle the mind, but he'll never tell where they are because he doesn't want anybody to find them and ransack them.
that's right.
Right?
That's
Talking
true.
to the ground,
Yes.
which we still have here as your ride around New Mexico. Cities of Gold is harder to find at the moment. That was
Is it?
actually Doug's book that brought us, was it your first book?
That was my second book, but that was the
Second.
one that
Brought
Barbara,
us together.
Yes, brought us together. And two bookstores ago. It was not this bookstore, not the previous one, but the
You're
one
right. It was the
before
first
that.
Poison Pen.
Yeah.
Right. It was. Yep.
She-
Anyway, I love Cities of Gold. That's when Doug rides from the Mexican border up. Have you all read? Some of you read it. It's great. But have you read Talking to the Ground as well, where he rides around the Navajo, the Four Mountains? And then, but unfortunately, the Camino Real, I don't think the Royal Highway is available right at the moment.
No, it was
That was the third one.
it was published by the University of New Mexico Press, and it had a very they've sold quite a few of them, but they didn't reprint. And now I think to get one of those books on the internet or whatever used is like $400, really expensive. So I got a bunch of them in my basement. I should put them up on eBay.
I'm keeping mine. No, can't have it. Anyway, what more can we say about the book? We don't want to venture into spoilers. That's the setup, is that we're in the cave, and there's the Isleta Pueblo bodies. Pretty sure it's Isleta because they're nearby, right?
That's right. Yeah, there's quite a bit of the NAGPRA law. You're probably familiar with that, which, if you find an Indian burial, there's very strict rules about what happens and so forth. So when Nora finds this burial, she goes to the Isleta Pueblo, and they come up and they identify it as definitely theirs. And they decide that they want to rebury the bones because they don't like this cave with these other dead people in it that are, the murders that took place. But the sheriff is like, no, you can't move those bones. And then the federal government is like, there's a huge bureaucratic red tape process to move bones like that. So Nora, maybe wrongly, maybe rightly, but she says she's working with the Indians. She says, look, we know that they're yours. Let's just go up there and take them out, and you go and you rebury them, and it'll be a fait accompli, and no one's going to challenge it because the NAGPRA law makes it pretty clear that the Isleta people have the right to govern those bones. Well, the sheriff shows up and he's like, you can't go anywhere with those bones. That's federal property. And that's where the problem with Skip develops. I won't go into it, but Skip is very impulsive.
Well, the sheriff is running for re-election. He sees a photo up, so he's really pissed because he's brought a film crew and so forth, and they're preempting. And that really is about as far as we ought to go, or we're going to spoil the plot here.
Yeah, but so there are quite a few threads running through the book, the main thread and then the Skip thread. So poor Nora's always worrying about her brother. He's always in trouble. And this isn't the first time,
Right. So what's new with you guys? Lincoln, we had a new book from you not this July, but a year ago, July. What are you doing now?
Lincoln.
Is that to me? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He dozed off.
Barbara wants to know tell Barbara what we're working on now.
Barbara, I have decided to give Dr. Logan a brief rest in terms of my solo books because Chrysalis involves so much research, on cutting edge VR and medical implants and things like that, it really, I wanted to give him and myself a rest. And so we've been concentrating most recently, both Doug and I, on the next and the last book in the Pendergast Lane tetralogy. It's a 4-book series if you include Cabinet of Curiosities, and it takes place mostly in the 19th century, which involves some fascinating research. And it's also interesting. It's hard to talk about it without giving away things, but we found ourselves for the first time perhaps with almost all of our biggest characters in the Pendergast series all on stage at once. And this really hasn't happened before, and we really had to work hard, and we're still working hard, the book isn't finished, to keep all their threads going and make sure they don't implode. And it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun because when this book is done, that whole, we've done a lot of books with Pendergast's family and his crazy old aunt and his evil ancestors, and we plan this book to sum it all up, and we're going to tie it up with a big bow and hand it out next year, and then that part of his life will be done for a while. And some other things are finished too in this book. A lot of questions we've left hanging fire are answered, or if not answered, are concluded behind closed doors.
That yeah,
you
that
know what
don't say anymore. That's enough. Yeah, this is how many of you read The Cabinet of Dr. Lang? How many were really angry at us the way that book ended? I knew it. My wife, my father-in-law, everyone is mad at me. How could you do that? I got to 10 pages from the end, and I thought, how are they going to resolve this? And then 5 pages from the end, I realized, oh, they're not going to resolve this. Those bastards.
It's all Link's fault, you said.
Yeah. And anytime it's Link's fault. But anyway, no. This novel is going to wrap everything up. You're going to have a very satisfying ending, I promise.
So you've had several story arcs in the Pendergast series, but haven't most of them been trilogies?
Well,
I'm
some
trying
of them,
to remember. This is a tetralogy, which a term I love because you don't see it or hear it very often.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of threads that are going to get wrapped up. This is not the end of the Pendergast series, but it's definitely the end of this whole Cabinet of Curiosities, Dr. Lang, bloodless sort of series. So it's called The Angel of Vengeance. That's the title of the book. I think you're the first to hear that. Anyway.
I know we don't know when it's going to publish yet, so I know. Sorry, you can't order it yet. It's a mythical book.
Well, we have to finish it, and yeah.
Publishers don't give you a price or anything until it's an actual book. Otherwise, you're just guessing.
Writers are so unreliable; they never get their books in on time. But Lincoln and I are pretty reliable, you know.
So once you've done the fourth Nora Kelly and you finish up the Angel of Vengeance, are you going to then move back to Nora?
We do. We have another idea for Nora and Corey, again in New Mexico, and it's a more grounded, not quite so crazy book as the Pendergast books. But anyway, yeah, I can't talk about it, but we haven't really worked out the details. But
Well, what I do know is that you have a new very many book contract, so that's encouraging. You'll be happy to know that they're obligated to write several more books.
yeah, our publisher just gave us a 6-book contract. I mean, they love us, and thank you.
And Doug has 2 books coming out in the next 8 months? Is that right,
He
Doug?
has 2.5
That's
books
right,
coming
yeah.
out.
So?
Right.
That's right. I have a book coming out in December, which is a nonfiction. It's a collection of nonfiction stories, of real stories, true stories, really bizarre things.
And he'll be here December 5th to sign it.
Yeah, murder, cannibalism, buried treasure,
Egyptian
crazy
tombs.
stuff,
Right.
all true. Everything in that book is true. And then in April, I have my solo novel coming out called Extinction, which I'm very proud of. I think it's a good one. Well,
And
well,
if I prevail, Jim Rollins is going to come with Doug and talk about his 3rd science fiction book. Right.
yeah, Jim
Well,
and
it's not for sure because I have to persuade Jim to do it, but I'm pretty persuasive, so we're going to hope.
well, Jim and Lincoln and I go way back. We are old friends. We blurbed his first book. He's blurbed our books. He's a great guy. We love his work. He's a wonderful writer. Do you all read James Rollins?
And he's gone back to science fiction and fantasy with that trilogy. What's it called?
The Sigma.
Not Sigma Force. It has a different. The moon something Moonfall. I think it might be Moonfall. Right. Anyway, it's set on a planet.
We're not in a bookstore.
Right. Well, I could look it up. It's set on a planet that doesn't revolve, so one side's always dark and one side's always sunny, and what happens in the borders and all. It's really an interesting. I think it is called Moonfall, and there's been 2 so far.
Yeah, I have to read those. I used to read science fiction, and I haven't recently, but I should get back into it. I've heard those are very good books.
So, how about questions from the audience? Since we've decided we will only get to spoilers if we continue talking. Who has the question?
Sure, sure, yes.
Would you repeat the question?
Yes, I will. Okay.
I just had a question about the books you were talking about earlier, Cities of Gold, and I know you had written a book previously that had like photos in it, I think, and it was published in Discontinued. Is that the one?
Yeah, well, this Cities of Gold was published without photographs, but if you buy the ebook, there are photos in it. The ebook, only the ebook has photographs because the publisher wouldn't put photographs in it because it was too expensive. So when I did the ebook myself, because that was before ebook rights were sold, so I kept those rights. I put photographs in there. So, yeah. But
Talking to the Ground, the second one does have photographs
they
in
do,
it that
yeah.
you took. And I'm trying to remember if the El Camino, the Royal Highway book, doesn't.
It had beautiful photographs, but it was,
Right.
again, that was never out in ebook, and it's so expensive now you can't buy it. It's, you
Yeah,
know.
but it's a beautiful book. If you hunt around on various websites, Amazon or I'm trying to remember what the name of there's a fancy used book website I can't remember the name of, but you might be able to run across it. Um,
I've got one copy for sale.
Hey, don't you
Inscribed.
dare sell it inscribed.
Next event, Lincoln will auction it off,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
Can we ask another nonfiction?
yes.
I was at your talk in Naperville when you did Lost Monkey King or
Lost City of the Monkey God. Yes.
Thank you. And I hadn't read the book yet because I just got it that
Mhm.
day. How do the natives live with those snakes?
Well, I recently read an article that said that the number of people who die in Central and South America from fer-de-lance snakes are thousands. I mean, it's really dangerous. Yeah, there are a lot of people who die from that. And, most of them don't have access to any hospital or anything. They get bitten. It's
But
horrible.
after I met you and then I read the book and it's like, oh, I wish I could ask you that question. So
Yeah,
that's what
no,
wondered about.
I don't know how they do it. Yeah.
They're
well,
not. They're not wearing sorrel boots as they're tromping around. I mean, I think that has a lot to do with it. You need snake-proof footwear in order to protect yourself.
Well, we
Or
had.
did they hang out of trees and nail you in your neck? I
Well,
don't even
they
know.
fall down on you from trees.
Oh, they do. Oh, well, then
but-
footwear won't help.
But the big ones are on the ground. But they also call them jumping vipers. So you wear these snake gaiters that start at your knee and go down, but they coil up and when they bite you, they leap up. They hit you higher than your knees, and so that's they have snake gaiters that go up to your waist, but then they fall down from the trees. I don't know. There's no way to escape them.
How did you?
I just thank God I didn't get bitten. I walked by one. It was ready to strike. I walked by it twice without seeing it, and then I saw it and I backed up and it was at night. I shone my light on it. It was huge. It was coiled up. Its head was this high off the ground, and I said, "Hey, you guys, there's a big snake here." And these 3 British guys who were running the expedition, there were only a few of us. This is the advance guard. They came in and said, "Well, keep your light on him. I'm going to move him." And I was like, "Move him? Are you kidding?" And he cut a big long snake stick and he pinned the snake. And it wasn't until he pinned it that we all realized how big it was. It suddenly flashed out, and it was striking everywhere. And there was literally venom, spewing venom in arcs through the air, through these. Its mouth was open, it was snow white mouth, and these fangs that were more than an inch long. We measured them after the demise of the poor snake. He worked his hand up behind and he grabbed the snake behind the head and was trying to bite him, and it expelled venom all over the back of his hand, and the skin was bubbling. It was like, oh my God. And so he wrestled the snake to the ground and he cut off its head. And the head kept fighting him, kept biting and snapping and spewing venom. So he took his knife and stabbed it through the head into the ground. Meanwhile, the headless snake is still fighting him. And he's wrestling with this headless snake. And finally, he gets that subdued. And then he washes his hands off really quickly. And this guy's British. He looks around and says, "Nothing like that to concentrate the mind, is there?"
So that's his idea of moving the snake, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, moving it very significantly.
Moving it from this world to the next.
Yes.
There's a bit of Monty Python in that, isn't there?
It was, it was funny. We had a National Geographic photographer standing there and a filmmaker. And when this was all over, I said, "Did anyone get that?" And he was like, "Oh my God, where's my camera? Where's my camera?" I couldn't believe it. I was like, what kind of photographer is this? Missed the whole thing. Yes.
It's hard to imagine anybody, somebody in real life named Skip being scared serious. It kind of begs the question, did you come up with the name Skip and then decided you had to make it goofy? Or did you meet a goofy brother and you picked the name Skip?
Well, now that's a very good question. Link, did you hear that question? He
No.
asked, I think you should answer this. He asked about Skip. He said, Skip is not a very serious name. So, did we think of the name Skip and then come up with a goofy character to go with the name? Or did we think of a goofy character and then come up with the name Skip to go with the name? In other words, how did that character come about? Do you remember?
I can answer part of that question. Skip didn't used to be a goofy character. In Thunderhead, he was going downhill fast. He didn't have a job. Both their parents were dead, and he was drinking too much. He had like 50 tequila worms stuck on a long shish kebab stick, and his apartment was funky. And Nora went in there and looked at the fish tank that had, it was dark and full of algae, and she didn't dare look too closely. And he was in a bad way. So I think Skip, I know that's not my name. That's got to be Doug's name. And I don't mean that as an insult, but I don't know where the hell he came up with that. I really am envious of some of Doug's names. I told him today, I wish I come up with the name Smithback. I don't know where the hell you got that from, but I wish that was mine. It's not. But it took Skip a couple of books before he was remediated, and he still isn't completely. He still gets in trouble. That's why we're debating. Actually, it was my wife who was suggested that we kill him off. So.
Well, Skip, in the original book, Thunderhead, we wanted Nora, this serious archaeologist, to have a brother who really needed taking care of. And she's worried about him because, both her parents are dead. Her father disappeared in the canyon lands of Utah, and no one knows what happened to him. And so there's a lot of agony in that family over that. And the ranch that they owned went to hell and is a vacant building, and all the windows are broken, and squatters are in there. So I thought let's give her a brother who's really damaged by this, and for her to have a lot of protective feeling towards her younger brother. And we really like Skip, even if he does have his problems. But
Well, I liked Holroyd, the other character in that book, who worked for NASA, who rode an old Indian motorcycle and had the hots for Nora. But Skip walked out of that book alive, and Holroyd
did not. No one is safe in our books.
Was there another part to your question?
Yeah, actually, that was great hearing so much about Skip. I was wondering, Doug, have you ever considered collaborating with your brother on a fiction book? Because I read that book Micro where he finished up.
Oh yeah.
It was really good.
Yeah, no, my brother's an incredible writer. Well, we talked about this, and it's never gone anywhere, but we thought it'd be fun to do like a memoir growing up about our childhood. And I'd write one chapter, and then he'd write the next chapter and say, "Oh, everything you just read, that my brother wrote is wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Here's how it really happened." So it'd be kind of like a dialogue like that. But I can't get him to do it. He's got his own projects.
So we're talking about Richard Preston, who wrote The Hot Zone, which, if you recall, was a huge bestseller for a long time. And then subsequently, what's the book that he was talking about?
Oh, Micro. Yeah, he finished. They found a half-written book on Michael Crichton's computer after he died. And so they went to my brother and they said, "Would you finish the book?" And he did. And, it's funny. I read that book and the first half was quite good. And the second half was awesome. I was like, "Dick, I know what page you started writing at. I know the very page." And he said, "Yeah, they wouldn't let me revise what Michael had written, which, they didn't want him rewriting him, I guess." But anyway.
That book of memoirs of Doug and Dick will never be published because there are things they did as kids that have no statutory limitation on.
We were really bad kids, but my brother was like a bit of an inventor. He was kind of a genius, and he built stuff. And he also knew how to make explosives. And the thing is that it's absolutely incredible that we survived with no loss of fingers, toes, or eyes or whatever, because he made these huge bombs. And then he would charge all the kids in the neighborhood a quarter to watch him blow up something. And I mean, he would he'd blow a crater in the ice of a lake. We grew up in New England. I mean, he blew up stuff. He'd build these huge, cities out of cardboard and blow them up. And, anyway. Yes. I do. I write there every day. Yeah. Yeah, that's it kind of looks like a privy. It's about the same size, but I like it. It's small. It's only room for me, and it's out in the woods, so no one bothers me because it's too far to walk. They're lazy. And when
But
my kids were
this is in Maine.
in Maine,
And in
yes.
Santa Fe, you have a real office.
Oh, in Santa Fe, I've got a gorgeous office downtown. Yeah, it's kind of, yeah.
When I was at Doug's house in Maine last, I offered to carve a crescent moon on the door, but he wouldn't let me.
Where do you write?
Me?
Yeah.
I write. I've always written upstairs. Here in Florida, I have a second floor office, under the eaves, and it's nobody else comes up here to bother me, and somehow I'm able to write without getting distracted by all the guitars and computer games and cameras and other gadgets I have. I guess it's 30 years of practice.
Patrick, do you have audience questions?
Yeah, there are a few. Okay. Great. One comment on Facebook, people say, "Guys, really, do people actually still say Bogart the joint?" I thought that was pure 80s.
Uh-oh. Oh, are we showing our age?
What was it?
He wanted to know if people still say Bogart that joint.
Doug wrote that line.
Yeah, if it's a good line, I wrote it, but if it's a bad line, Link wrote it.
Well, we also wrote that somebody was rocking a North Face boot. I mean, we throw in the new with the old.
I don't know. Is that? I mean, maybe we really are kind of old fuddy-duddies now.
You're on the cutting edge, right?
Cutting
Swag.
edge. That's right.
Let's see. And sorry if you've actually answered this already, but somebody who goes by the name Undead Sick 83 would like to know. I have a question for Mr. Preston and Mr. Child. Is Margot Green going to return anytime soon?
All right, Link. This is for you. Is Margot Green going to return anytime soon?
No, she's going to return, but not soon. We've just shrugged off a whole slew of characters. Well, we're in the process of it. We get differing feedback from people. Some people like these long stories, but that have many parts of them. Others prefer when Pendergast has a new adventure each time, almost like Sherlock Holmes. And Margot really ended up with a bunch of issues, you know, after Relic, and then we put her through a lot more in Reliquary, and then again in I think it was Blue Labyrinth. So she's resting right now, but she will be back. She will be back.
Yeah,
We haven't forgotten about her.
she's in the sanatorium right now, recovering her sanity. So
Yeah, I keep wanting to know when someone's going to ask us, "Hey, when is Pendergast Kid going to emerge, or when is Viola Masculine going to come back?" We've left a lot of detritus and impedimenta behind us, you know, as we've barreled ahead.
Have you talked about Ren yet? The return of possible return of Ren?
oh, the possible return of Ren. Well, will Ren return? Yes, he is really one of our favorite bit characters. He definitely will return. I'm not sure exactly when, but we like Ren. So
Anybody out there remember Mime?
Mime, yes. Well, Mime is returning.
Sooner than you know, yes.
We're going to leave on that note, sooner than you know. Yeah, let's see here. What do we have? Well, there are a lot of Skip fans online on both Facebook and YouTube. Very
Good.
vocal group defending Skip.